Hello, this video will provide you with some review and practice for analyzing and interpreting nonfiction, character, and setting. Direct characterization is when the author tells us something about the character. It's in the text, you can pull it out and you can see it right in there. Indirect characterization, however, is when the author shows the reader something about a character. Here you need to make inferences. There are 5 ways to determine indirect characterization. You can think of those ways as steal, to help you remember. Speech is what a character says, the dialogue. T for thoughts, what a character thinks and or feels. E for effects, the effect a character has on others, relationships. A for actions, what a character does. And L for looks, a character's physical appearance. Let's do some more practice by taking a look at the following excerpt, which is an excerpt from Stephen Hawking's new memoir, My Brief History. It focuses on his time at Oxford and when he first started noticing symptoms of ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. My last year at Oxford, I noticed that I was getting increasingly clumsy. I went to the doctor after falling down some stairs, but all he said was lay off the beer. I became even more clumsy after moving to Cambridge. At Christmas, when I went skating on the lake at St. Albans, I fell over and couldn't get up. My mother noticed these problems and took me to the family doctor. He referred me to a specialist, and shortly after my 21st birthday, I went into the hospital for testing. I was in for 2 weeks, during which I had a wide variety of tests. They took a muscle sample from my arm, stuck electrodes into me, and then injected some radio-opaque fluid into my spine, and with x-rays watched it go up and down as they tilted the bed. After all that, they didn't tell me what I had, except that it was not multiple sclerosis and that I was an atypical case. I gathered, however, that they expected it to continue to get worse and that there was nothing they could do except give me vitamins, though I could see they didn't expect them to have much effect. I didn't ask for more details at that time because they obviously had nothing good to tell me. The realization that I had an incurable disease that was likely to kill me in a few years was a bit of a shock. How could something like this happen to me? However, while I was in the hospital, I had seen a boy I vaguely knew die of leukemia in the bed opposite me, and it had not been a pretty sight. Clearly, there were people who were worse off than me. At least my condition didn't make me feel sick. Whenever I feel inclined to be sorry for myself, I remember that boy. Not knowing what was going to happen to me or how rapidly the disease would progress, I was at a loose end. The doctors told me to go back to Cambridge and carry on with the research I had just started in general relativity and cosmology, but I was not making progress because I didn't have much mathematical background. And anyway, it was hard to focus when I might not live long enough to finish my PhD. I felt somewhat of a tragic character. I took to listening to Wagner, but reports and magazine articles that I also drank heavily at that time are an exaggeration. Once one article said it, other articles copied it because it made a good story, and eventually everyone believed that anything that had appeared in print so many times must be true. My dreams at that time, however, were rather disturbed. Before my condition was diagnosed, I had been very bored with life. There had not seemed to be anything worth doing. But shortly after I came out of the hospital, I dreamed that I was going to be executed. I suddenly realized that there were a lot of worthwhile things I could do if I was reprieved. Another dream I had several times was that I would sacrifice my life to save others. After all, if I was going to die anyway, I might as well do some good. Which statement most accurately indicates the author's attitude towards his incurable disease? Hawking feels hopeless because he will not get to finish his PhD. Hawking feels indifferent because there isn't anything that he wants to do. Hawking feels inspired to make a difference in the world before he dies. Or Hawking feels excited because he will be able to sacrifice himself for others. If you said C, you are correct. Of course, Hawking's initial reaction is surprise. He's probably upset as well. He says, how could something like this happen to me? However, he remembers the story of the boy he knew in the hospital who died of leukemia. He notes that there are others who have it worse, but struggles to find his previous endeavors worthwhile, knowing that death is imminent. Therefore, he feels conflicted. How could something like this happen to me? However, while I was in the hospital, I had seen a boy I vaguely knew die of leukemia in the bed opposite me, and it had not been a pretty sight. Clearly, there were people who were worse off than me. At least my condition didn't make me feel sick. Whenever I feel inclined to be sorry for myself, I remember that boy. Which adjective best describes the mood in this section of Hawking's story? A. Somber, B. Nostalgic, C. Inspiring, or D. Uplifting? If you chose D. Uplifting, then you're correct. The memory itself may be somber. A boy died, but Hawking's memory of this boy that he vaguely knew serves to keep him from falling into despair or depression. He realizes that others have it worse, and we can infer that he is going to try to find positivity in his situation. At least my condition didn't make me feel sick, he says. Setting: the time, place, physical details, and circumstances in which a situation occurs. Setting includes the background, atmosphere, or environment in which characters live and move, and usually include physical characteristics of the surroundings. This definition is from the All-American Glossary of Literary Terms. Setting is the time of day, it could be time period, it could be a significant event. The place, it could be an empty schoolroom, or it could be the United States of America. It could be a large place, it could be a small confined space. It's all going to be described for you in some way. You might have to make inferences, but it's going to be described or explained to you in some way so that you know where the story is taking place. Economic or social class. Is it a poor area? Is it a rich area? Environment and weather. The conditions outside, the surrounding areas, all of those things are going to help you to better understand the setting. Setting can also contribute to the mood. How do you feel? It could be a stormy beach, which might give you a sense of eeriness or fear. Or it could be a bright sunny day, which might give you a sense of joy or of relaxing. Setting in conflict. What's the problem? You might be stranded in the ocean. Or the environment can serve to help the conflict, where you can use the resources around you to help in the situation. Let's do some review and practice. Wild Plum Jelly by Tracy Wilson. In the winter of 1976, when I was only 4 years old, my family moved into a modest home in growing Greenville neighborhood. Upon a slope on one side of the house stood a dozen tree sprigs looking rather bald and barren. By springtime, however, the little trees began growing taller and bushier by the day. Upon exploring the hillside in mid-July, I noticed hundreds of quarter-sized pinkish orbs dangling, daring me to pick just one. Of course I did. Plum? I questioned. Yes, plums, she reiterated. She explained that these were not the same as the deeply colored, voluptuous kind I had seen in the market. These were smaller and a much sourer variety. Knowing that they were safe, I ate enough that one afternoon to give me a stomachache that lasted 2 days. As the plums became riper and sweeter, my grandma and I picked enough to fill 2 enormous buckets. She taught me to make jelly from the tiny fruits which we could enjoy all winter long. Years later, I was driving down a long, winding highway when I noticed several wild plum trees lining the hedgerow. I had to pull over. I picked up a heaping handful. As I sat there on the side of the highway, I basked in the tartness of my childhood fruit and in the sweetness of the memory of making jelly with the greatest woman I had ever known. Which phrase best describes the setting of this memoir? A. 1976 during plum picking season. B. A neighborhood that the narrator's grandmother lives in. C. The speaker's grandmother's house in Greenville in 1976 during plum picking season. Or D. A plum factory that makes plum jelly for the narrator's grandmother and her family. If you chose C, then you're correct. The most detailed and specific description of the setting is the correct answer. The other answer choices relate only to a few details related to the setting, but none are fully complete. How does the setting of this memoir affect its plot? A. The work involved in making plum jelly is difficult. B. The death of her grandmother makes the narrator sad. C. The plum trees the narrator sees years later fill her with sadness. D. The plum trees the narrator sees years later fill her with nostalgia. If you chose D, you're correct. The narrator remembers a happy time from her childhood that was spent making plum jelly with her grandmother. Years later, when she passes a plum tree orchard, she is compelled to stop, enjoy the taste of the plums, and fondly remember her grandmother. If you have any questions, please make sure to ask before you take the quiz today.